Welcome to Foundation Mathematics, Decimals and Percentages, Multiplication of Decimal Numbers. The objectives for this session are learning how to multiply decimals by multiples of 10 and multiply decimals by whole numbers and multiply decimal numbers by each other. We will begin by multiplying a decimal number by 10, 100 and 1000. When we multiply a decimal by 10, we form a new number by moving the decimal point one place to the right. Let's demonstrate how to do this by using an example. Let's multiply 31.8233 first by 10, then by 100, and then by 1000. So if we multiply 31.8233 by 10, we get 318.233. The same digits with the decimal place shifted one place to the right. Similarly, if we multiply 31.8233 by 100, we get the same digits with the decimal place shifted two places to the right. And finally, if we multiply 31.8233 by 1000, we get the same digits with the decimal place shifted three places to the right. We will now look at how to multiply a decimal number by a whole number. Let's consider how to multiply 94.5 by 3. From what we have just learnt, 94.5 can be written as 945 divided by 10. (945) multiplied by 3 equals 2,835. Finally, dividing this value by 10 gives us 283.5. Let's look at another example. We're going to consider how to multiply 2.37 by 11. Similar to the previous example, 2.37 can be written as 237 divided by 100. (237) multiplied by 11 equals 2,607. And finally, dividing this value by 100 gives us 26.07. We will now take a look at how to multiply a decimal number by a two-digit number. To do this, multiply the numbers as normal and then add in the decimal point at the end. Let's consider how to multiply 38.0941 by 25. Arrange the two numbers as shown. Always put the larger number above the smaller number and ensure that you begin multiplying from the right. Consider the 5 first. 5 times 1 is 5. Position the answer in the same column as the 1. 5 times 4 is 20. Position the 0 in the same column as the 4 and carry the 2 over to the next column along. 5 times 9 is 45. Remember to add the 2 to give the answer 47. Position the 7 in the same column as the 9 and carry the 4 over to the next column along. Now continue in the same way until you reach the very end. As shown. We now need to multiply our decimal number by the 2. This is actually a 20, so we need to add 0 in the units in the next row down in our calculations, as shown. We can now progress as we did previously. So 2 times 1 is 2, 2 times 4 is 8, and so on. We can now add the 2 rows. So 5 add 0 is 5, 0 add 2 is 2, 7 add 8 is 15, position the 5 as shown and the 1 is carried over, 4 add 8 add 1 is 13, 0 add 1 is 2, 9 add 6 is 15, and 1 plus 7 plus 1 is 9. Since there are 4 places after our decimal number, then we add the decimal point in our answer so that there are 4 digits after it, as shown. Now let's take a look at how to multiply 2 decimal numbers by each other. Consider the example on the screen. So when multiplying 473,085 by 138, multiply in a manner similar to the previous example for the first 2 rows as shown. We now need to multiply our decimal number by the 1. If we ignore the decimal, this is actually 100, so we need to add 2 zeros in the units and tens in the next row down in our calculations, as shown. We can now progress as we did previously. So 1 times 5 is 5. Position this to the left of the 0 as shown. 1 times 8 is 8. Position this to the left of the previous digit as shown. And now continue in the same way until you reach the very end. We can now add the 3 rows. So 0 add 0 add 0 is 0. 8 plus 5 add 0 is 13. 6 add 5 add 5 add 1 is 17. 4 add 2 add 8 add 1 is 15, and so on. Since there are 3 places after our first decimal number and 2 places after our second decimal number, then we can add these 2 decimal places and in our final answer position the decimal point so that the answer is to 5 decimal places. To give us 652.85730. When multiplying a decimal by 1/10 of a decimal, we can convert both numbers to fractions and multiply the fractions as shown in a previous unit. Let's try the example shown on the screen. Begin by converting the decimals to fractions. So 8.5 becomes 85/10 and 0.8 becomes 8/10. We can now multiply the numerator by the numerator, so 85 times 8, and the denominator by the denominator, so 10 times 10. And this gives us 680/100, which is equal to 6.80. The decimal point has been moved 2 places to the left. Let's try another example shown on the screen. Begin by converting the decimals to fractions. So 11.3 becomes 113 divided by 10, and 0.5 becomes 5 divided by 10. Now multiply the numerator by the numerator and multiply the denominator by the denominator to give 565/100, which is equal to 5.65. Since we're dividing by 100, we move the decimal point 2 places to the left. When multiplying a decimal by 100th of a decimal, we can again convert to fractions and multiply in the usual way. Let's try the example shown on the screen. 2.4 becomes 24/10 and 0.05 becomes 5/100. Again, multiplying the numerator by the numerator gives 24 times 5, and multiplying the denominator by the denominator gives 10 times 100. And this is equal to 220/1000, which is equal to 0.220. Since we're dividing by 1,000, we move the decimal point 3 places to the left. When multiplying a decimal by 100th of a decimal, we can again convert both numbers to fractions and multiply the fractions as shown in a previous unit. So let's try the example on the screen. Begin by converting the decimals to fractions, as shown. Then multiply the numerator by the numerator and the denominator by the denominator to give 915/1000. And this, of course, is equal to 0.915. The decimal point has moved 3 places to the left since we're dividing by 1,000. When multiplying a decimal by a decimal with up to 3 decimal places, either convert both to fractions or multiply using long multiplication and add the decimal at the end, as in a previous example. Let's try the example shown on the screen. We begin by converting both decimals to fractions, as shown. Then multiply the numerators and the denominators to give 126 over 10,000, which is equal to 0.0126. Let's try another example. Again, convert the decimals to fractions. Move the decimal point in the first decimal once to the right and divide by 10. And move the decimal point in the second decimal 3 places to the right and divide by 1,000. Multiply the numerator by the numerator and the denominator by the denominator to give 37,422 out of 10,000, which is equal to 3.7422. This brings us to the end of this session. If you have understood its contents, you should be able to multiply decimals by multiples of 10, multiply decimals by whole numbers, and multiply decimal numbers by each other. Thank you very much for listening. For a deeper understanding, do attempt the exercises in your textbook related to this topic.